Good morning and welcome to this morning's Knowledge Bank. Today we're going to be talking about fire doors, closing the gap on door surveys and regulation 10 checks. The session is going to be hosted by Tom Welland and Adam Sanders from RiskBase. If you've got any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get through as many as possible at the end. The webinar is also being recorded today and will be available to watch back via our YouTube channel this afternoon. I am now going to hand you over to Adam to begin the session. I think you're still on mute at the moment, Adam.
Hello. This isn't massively about me. This is mostly hosted by Tom, who I've had the pleasure of working with for a few years now. He's going to talk you through most of the legislation and the best practice around door checks from a block manager's perspective, but also from a technical perspective in terms of what a door surveyor will be looking at. And then we'll run through some of the practical applications of how you guys can manage the Fire Safety England inspections and manage remedial work coming out of your own door surveys that you've instructed. I'll hand over to Tom.
Good morning, everyone. So without further ado, who am I? Who am I to tell you about anything about doors? I'm a member of the Institute of Fire Safety Managers. I've got 20 plus years experience in fire engineering, mainly specialising in fire doors. I was a councillor at the Fire Industry Association. I was one of the founding members of their Fire Risk Assessment Council. I chaired the Fire Door Committee for the FIA, and I was consulting on doors before it was cool. I say that because at the moment there seems to be so much noise and an awful lot of experts that are coming out. I've was in a sort of previous workplace, was a compliance manager all around fire doors, testing standards. Doors and their compliance are not a new thing. At the moment, there should just be a focus on it, but we must remember that the legislation surrounding doors and the checks should have been carried out for a long time. So this is what we're going to try and do, perhaps dispel some myths and talk about actually when remedials are required and what the checks that you should be having carried out, what their remit should be. So we're going to discuss what actually is a fire door. What does it mean? What the law says you need to do, the different types of fire door assessments and when they might be required. We're going to briefly go over the law versus guidance and British standards, and a little bit I'll get on my soapbox and talk about what is actually going wrong. When I do presentations, I'm quite happy to accept any questions, comments. So if you do have them, perhaps save them up, and we'll have a session right at the end of this where I'm quite happy to discuss any questions you've got that are surrounding doors or the legislation or what's happening at the moment. So when we look at doors, we need to take it back and actually understand what's the relevance of a fire door. Why is it inside a building? What's the importance? Well, it all comes down to the building design. So when a building is being built, obviously you can either do it via building regulations, by 999, you can use the fire engineered approach. It's important to note that fire doors are precautions that must be installed into buildings, but there's lots of different scenarios when and where a fire door will be required, or what type of fire door would be required. So a fire door is designed so it can stop the spread of heat and smoke throughout a premises. So the way that you would do this inside a building is compartmentation, effectively. So if we take blocks of flats, they're made into lots of little shoe boxes, and those shoe boxes are designed to compartment a fire. So if fire does break out, it will stay in that compartment, and the rest of the compartments should be unaffected by fire for a period of time, therefore maintaining an effective means of escape. All of this has been cleverly worked out by architects, designers, fire engineers to make sure that the building is built, and that's how it would operate if there is a fire. We look at the compartmentation of the walls, of the floors. and it's built perfectly. So providing it's constructed well, using the right materials, the right quality of workmanship, the premises that we're looking at should maintain effective means of escape. So the egress should be safe. People should be able to stay in their compartments for a period of time. What stops the plan actually working? It's not men. I will say that. It's various people. So once a building's built, it becomes dangerous when people occupy it. So you might get an IT company, or you might get a Sky person coming in and putting cables through the building, punching through compartment lines. You might find various workmen. You might find damage to the building. This all can put holes inside compartmentation. So therefore, the spread of fire and smoke goes out. It goes away from the plan. So from your shoe boxes, they've all of a sudden got lots of holes in them. And that's what we're trying to mitigate against. That's what we're trying to think. So the biggest issue that we've got, the biggest hole in those shoe boxes, is your fire doors. We need fire doors so we can obviously get inside and out of our shoe boxes. But that's what we're primarily looking for, is to keep those doors as effective as possible. So they are your shield. It's a good illustration here. Have a well-fitted fire door. You can see behind that door the absolute devastation that a fire's caused, but on the other side, the paint is still absolutely fine. The other side of that door is basically providing an effective means of escape. So people can walk past that door with a big fire raging behind it, and it's perfect. If you ever have the opportunity, there's really good tests that you can watch online. An EN 1634 test, which is a furnace test carried out by people like Warrington Fire. You can see how impressive fire doors actually can be. They're highly engineered, manufactured devices, which will really do a great job in the case of a fire. They are your shield. So what makes a fire door? There's lots of different components that make up a fire door. You will typically have 3 hinges on the door. You'll have intermittent fire and smoke seals. So they are seals that go around the fire door, which when heat hits them, they expand and close any of the gaps. You'll have a door closer, which should close the door in a controlled manner. You should have signage. Some instances you would have a hold open device, locks, latches, glazing. There's lots of different components that will make up those fire doors, and each of the components have their own testing standards which they must comply to. So hold open devices or door close, for example, there's a testing standard called EN 1154. That means the product's been tested and certified so it will close up to 500,000 times before you see any damage to it. Our checks that be carried out should make sure that actually once a door's been installed, we're looking at these items, these components are still in good working order. The clever part of a fire door really is, as I said, it's the engineered design of a fire door. So when you look at a fire door and it looks lovely, the actual veneer, the wood on the outside is the expensive part, I guess. That's what makes it look nice. But inside, there are millions and millions of little splinters of wood which are held together by intermittent glue. That is your barrier. So when the veneer on the outside, that cracks and crumbles and goes away, that's not your barrier. It's the sandwich on the inside. That's what's protecting. That's what's protecting the occupants. That's what's protecting and keeping that means of escape, your shield against the fire. And we must remember in blocks of flats, what we are actually trying to do is think that there's a fire in someone's flat and they've left the flat, and does the door close behind them? That's your barrier. That's what we're trying to do to make sure the other occupants of the building can walk past that flat that's on fire and they are safe for a period of time. So what does the law say about this? The law, if we're talking just in England and Wales, the fire safety order. So the fire safety order requires that in a block of flats, there are suitable fire precautions so the common parts are safe as a means of escape from fire. Under Article 9 of the fire safety order, a risk assessment shall identify fire doors and determine whether they should adequately resist the spread of fire and smoke into or within the common parts. So this is the actual, if you were contravening law, you'd be prosecuted under this article of the fire safety order. The fire safety order is not a prescriptive bit of guidance. It uses terminology like suitable and sufficient as far as reasonably practicable, and reasonable adjustments. So it decides what's reasonable in the circumstances of the case. The law doesn't say thou shalt have no more than 3 millimeters gap around a door. It doesn't talk like that. It does. In guidance, we have code of practice, we have British standards, which gives us as assessors more guidance for what we should allow, but there should be an assessment of that risk. We live in a world where no building is going to be perfect. We also live in a world where just because you do not meet the guidance in a British standard does not mean that the building is unsafe. I dealt with an issue in East Sussex a while ago. There's some beautiful old buildings. One was a care home, a lovely old Victorian building, these big solid oak doors. They wouldn't meet a British standard, which is all around fire doors. However, the argument was actually those doors are solid oak and they will maintain an effective means of escape. It doesn't mean to say that you have to have newly tested certificates and things like that. You have to put the case forward if you are deviating away from a British standard, but it doesn't mean to say that you are breaking the law because you do not have all of the components which would, if you're installing a modern brand new fire door, you would require. So following from Grenfell, we have the Fire Safety England regulations. So they came into force in January 23. The regulations implement all of those recommendations made to the government in the Grenfell Tower inquiry. So this is where I guess Regulation 10 and the frequency of inspections and the around fire doors are required, and a little bit more guidance around exactly what we've learned. I think certainly in the UK, we've been quite good at when we have a fire, we learn about it. If we go back to the Rose Park care home fire, lots of fire doors were evident in that. And I think it's BRE made a whole-scale replica of that building and they burnt it. And we learned a lot about that. I think, an awful lot of money has been spent and time given to understand how to make our premises safer when we unfortunately do have a fire. So we're going to focus on Regulation 10. So Regulation 10 applies to all blocks of flats that incorporate common parts, regardless of whether that block is purpose-built or a conversion. For the purpose of this legislation, flat entrance doors are included within the common parts. So that's important because the fire safety order is a commercial law. So the flat entrance doors are deemed to be a common part. So you would come under commercial law. I understand it can get difficult when you're dealing with residents that perhaps don't want to provide access, or you just can't have that level of communication with them. But it is still a requirement if you're the responsible person, so the owner, occupier, employer, or person in control of the extent of that premises, to gain access to that flat entrance door, to check that actually it is providing an effective means of escape.
There's a couple of interesting questions that people have posed on this already. One being, if the doors are demised to the leaseholders and the leaseholder refuses to cooperate, how would a block manager deal with that? So if the flat owner owns the door but won't get any remediation work done, who's responsible then?
That is probably a question for someone that's more up on in terms of law and leasehold law. I would suggest that you would need to make best endeavours. So you could liaise with the fire and rescue service. You could speak to them about the issue that you've got. I think if you've not actually worked out that there is an issue with that door, you would apply best endeavours. So if every other fire door in that, every other flat door is a good working order, what's to say that there would be an issue with that tenant's door? I think the engagement with the tenant is a good idea. So to make sure they're aware that that door is to protect them and the other people around them in the event of a fire, and it's important that it's checked. There are ways that if a tenant is perhaps they just don't want people coming into their flat. Well, then look for other ways. Can they send a video showing that door closing? Because what I would like to see is that it has a door closer, that it's not disengaged, that there isn't any visible signs of damage on that door. So what other ways can you work with that tenant to make it happen? But I know there has been instances where people have been able to force entry, using the fire and rescue service to actually get access to the other side of that door and doors be upgraded. So it is possible, but I'd say that the steps are communication and work out ways to do that. I mean, if the communication's broken down between the property manager, the block manager, and the actual tenant, is it a way that the fire consultant can help and perhaps speak to them? There's lots of different ways how you could do that.
And then just another question somebody's asked, just to confirm, this is only covering the flat entrance doors. It doesn't cover any doors within a flat. So
yeah,
the leaseholders can do whatever they want inside the flat, and we're not particularly worried about that. The question posed was, if there are fire doors on protected hallways within the flats, do we need to do anything? And the answer to that is no.
Yeah, so we're just looking at our common parts. So anything inside the flat coming under the Housing Act, that's inside your shoebox. So that's it's unlikely those doors would be required to be fire resistant.
Nick's posted quite an interesting statement on the previous question about getting access to a flat or to a flat front door, or if a leaseholder's not having work done to that door, saying that most leases for residential properties have got a clause stating they should not do anything that may potentially void the insurance. And that might be quite a nice clause to get in there to be able to provide that remediation work. There is also a clause in the Building Safety Act which can give you legal right to get access to a flat if something with that flat may affect the rest of the building. If anybody wants the detail on that, if they drop us an email later, we'll get some specific responses.
Yeah, it is entirely possible, and it is a law. And so if there is something that is stopping you from being able to carry out that law, but I'd always suggest with things like this, record every step, every measure you've put in place. So make sure there is a file to say that actually we've done best endeavours. These are the steps that we've taken to mitigate that risk of not being able to see that other side of the door. So Regulation 10 has two core requirements. Responsible persons must give information about the flat entrance doors to all residents, whether tenants or leaseholders. Responsible persons must carry out routine checks of fire doors, both in communal areas and flat entrance doors. This applies to blocks with a story 11 metres above ground. So I think the information is important. I think there's a lot of people that understand the word fire door, but they don't actually understand what it's there for. And I think in a block of flats, if people have been given more information, they understand, well, actually what we're looking at here is, as I go back to earlier, that there's a fire in your neighbour's flat and they come out of their flat and go downstairs. You then don't have to walk past an open door with a fire. That door should be closed, and you should have a period of time where you can walk past that flat, which potentially has a very large fire in it, and be absolutely safe. This can sometimes provide a bit of sort of resident pressure, that if all of the tenants are helping you out and getting the inspections, and John at flat 4 is just not doing it, sometimes a bit of peer pressure can help from the resident side as well. So resident engagement. So Regulation 10 requires residents given information that fire doors should be kept shut when not in use, to not tamper with self-closing devices, report faults or damage to fire doors. So with those of you on the call that are block managers, how do people do that? How do they record and report a fault or damage to fire doors? Provide to all new residents and remind all residents at least every 12 months. So on the left here, a little sort of message from our sponsors, as it were, so resident engagement portal, to be able to give people the relevant information on the evacuation procedure, what checks are being carried out, the last time they were being carried out, and also how to report a fault. It's a good system. I think it's important that depending on where you are and the types of occupants, that the text can be viewed if people have issues reading, perhaps they are have problems with their sight, or if the language needs to be in in 12 different if people have struggling reading English, how can it be provided to them? I think one of the main things, I think you can get bogged down with fire doors when looking at all the intricacies. So the threshold gap, the types of hinges, the number of screws in the hinges, the self-closing device, all the intricacies that goes around that. Really, is what I'm looking for is, does the door close? Because when we're testing a fire door, if we were to put it into a lab, we were looking that the fire door can restrict heat and smoke for 30 minutes or 60 minutes or 90 minutes. We've got to remember that 30 minutes when you put it in a test is basically in a furnace, extreme heat and smoke, and those fire doors will restrict heat and smoke from punching through that door for at least 30 minutes. Lots of those doors actually do a plus 10%. So when you're tested, if at the testing lab they say, well, you're going to pass that, you can run it for another 10%. So that door will give us 30 minutes, provided it's installed correctly. So if you've got to imagine that if there's a fire in a flat, typically it'd be around the kitchen, perhaps at Christmas, it's going to be in the lounge where a Christmas tree is. You've got to get up to furnace temperatures right at that door before it will buckle at 30 minutes. So you've actually got quite a long period of time. And this 30 minutes, you have to have guidance somewhere. You have to have a point in the sand. But is your building requiring 30 minutes? So what are the travel times from the occupants to get to a relative place of safety? If you have a door on the lower floors, the travel times are going to be less to get those occupants to a relative place of safety. So the risk assessment part of doors and perhaps faults that you're finding, it should be based on the types of occupants. Are they going to need any assistance in evacuating the building? How far away are they from an effective means of escape? Are they all familiar with the premises? There's lots of things that go into, okay, so you found a potential fault with the door, but what do you then need to do? What are the steps? What are the reasonable adjustments? And you try and mitigate that risk where possible. It doesn't mean to say that every door you find is going to be absolutely perfect. That's not the case. It's never going to happen. But you've got to remember that fire risk assessments are not a new process. We've been doing this since the fire safety order came in. Those doors will have been looked at. Granted, perhaps not in the same amount of detail, but it shouldn't be all of a sudden because there's a big sort of surge of fire door assessments that, it turns out all of your doors are non-compliant. But what's been happening for the years prior to that? Those doors have been in situ and someone has recorded a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment, and they've not flagged up that any doors require remedial actions. So Regulation 10 requires that if the top story of the building is above 11 metres in height, typically a building of more than 4 stories, the responsible person must use best endeavours to check all flat entrance doors at least every 12 months, carry out checks of any fire doors in communal areas at least every 3 months. So best endeavours is a really good statement. So what are you doing to, you're not going to get every single flat entrance door. It's just not going to happen. There will always be some issues. There are methods of communication that can help. I know with RiskBase, they can put calling cards through with QR codes to allow people to scan it and upload videos. Because remember, the tenant is perhaps not going to let you in, or perhaps they're working unusual hours, in which case you're not going to be able to get consultants in at those hours of the day. But can we at least get some evidence that the door closer is working? I can see it closing the door behind them. So as I said, it's recording all of those steps that you've taken to say, well, best endeavours say this. And so we've carried that out. And also utilising your existing staff, your workforce. So if you have handyman, maintenance people, if you're doing a routine inspection and you can see someone going into their flat, just stop quickly and just say, can I just quickly have a look at that door and take a couple of pictures? And at least it's gathering the information when you can, seizing the opportunity. So fire door checks, identification of issues in relation to the type of door and its intended fire resistance or resistance to fire and smoke is a matter for your fire risk assessment and compliance with the fire safety order. It is not a matter for Regulation 10 of the Fire Safety England Regulations 2022. So it's important to put these because I think I'm always concerned about with legislation change, there is a massive economic growth in certain sectors. So you will all see, if you've been on LinkedIn, there's the massive resurgence of fire door inspectors and this industry and telling you need to do that, it's dangerous, and it's ambulance chasing. Yes, there is a greater requirement. Yes, companies will seek to get assistance in doing that. That's absolutely fine. But it's important to note what their scope, what their remit is actually there to do. It shouldn't be go through a building, find every single fault that is relating to an installation standard and require remedials off the back of that. I've also seen an awful lot of companies which are working alongside a remedial company. So it turns out your door inspector's been in and they've produced you a big report. It's all very scary and it's got fail written all over it. But rather handily, they can introduce you to another company who can put all that all right. I'd really be concerned about that. But I think the point of what I want to get this presentation across is there has been no assessment of the risk. So there's been an assessment based on a British standard around installation of fire doors. That's fine. Give that information back to your fire risk assessor. Understand what that risk is. Go back to your door assessor and say, okay, that's fine. We've found issue, we've found fault. What does that mean for life safety within the property? What does that mean for maintaining an effective means of escape? And it's not a case that you have to make every single building, a prime perfect example. I'm also quite concerned when people carry out a remedial work on fire doors and they go, there we go, the problem's gone away. We've fixed the intermittent strips, or perhaps we've rehung the door and put another hinge on it, and there we go, it's fine. And actually what they've done is they've, the joiners rehung it, but it's now at a slightly different angle. So the original problem has gone away. However, you've introduced the new problem. Doors aren't a mechanical solution. They're not electronic. It can't be such binary as there we go, we've fixed that one particular issue. It is a complex thing, and particularly when you're putting doors back in situ, once you start removing it and putting it back on, you are introducing new risk. So you've got to remember that. And also, economy is written into the fire safety order. It's no one has a never-ending pot of money. If the fire safety order was all about every building should be the safest it can possibly be, then there'd be a massive push for sprinklers in every single block of flats. We're not going to take it that far. So it's important to note that not every issue that you find must be remediated. There must be an assessment of that risk. So the types of fire door checks, we carry out something like a pre-occupation survey, which is where a developer, basically it's snagging list time. So before it's handed over to the eventual owner or the housing association, it's a pre-occupation survey. So at that point, we really do we go to town on inspecting that fire door and making sure that it's a perfect example of a brand new fire door installation. You would carry out a fire door assessment as part of your annual fire risk assessment. You can carry out a non-destructive fire door assessment. So that's perhaps where you feel that you've got specific issues around the doors and you want to have a look. That would be fairly detailed. You can take it to the next step, which would be a destructive fire door assessment, which is typically part of a type 4 risk assessment. So that's where we would break off parts of the architrave and really go to town on the door. We've carried out some samples where we've removed some doors and sent them away for further testing, or as a Regulation 10 check. So as part of a Regulation 10 check, what should be being looked at. Number one, does it close? If the door we're looking at is, in theory, it's taken off and it's sent to a lab and we test it and it doesn't actually do 30 minutes anymore, it does 23 minutes. Are you really going to lose any sleep over it because it's 23 minutes in a furnace? I don't know. It depends on the situation. It depends on the age, how agile the occupants are, where that fire door is in the building. But really, what I'm most concerned about is, does it close? So is that door closer working like it's required to do? So you want to ensure that the self-closer is correctly installed, not broken or disengaged. Sometimes you will see a little bit of a fluid stain underneath it. That's hydraulic liquid leaking, and that's a good sign to say that's going to break after a while. Is it closing too fast? Is it closing too hard? These are things to look for the root cause. So if someone's disengaged that closer, there's a good chance it was just too strong for them. Most door closers these days will come with adjustments. So you have an adjustment for the swing speed, and then you have adjustment for the latching speed. So you can have the swing speed really quite slow and controlled. The latching speed, which is the last sort of 15 degrees, should have more of a kick to it so it can overcome a latch. But sometimes, rather than going, the resident's disengaged the door closer again, ask the question why. Perhaps it's just the door closer is just a cheap one, rather than saying, well, we've put the arm back on, it's going to happen again. So actually what we want to do is go back to the root cause and go, well, perhaps we need a new door closer which provides some tolerance for closing speeds, for latching speeds, so that resident is less likely to struggle with the weight of that door. Is there any damage to the door or the frame? If we go back to our sign of, well, actually, we've got the nice wood veneer on the outside and the intermittent glue. Once we start getting holes like this, you're going to have problems. Your shield has some risks, and heat and smoke can get to the other side of that door and effectively can buckle that door. Are intermittent strips and cold smoke seals properly fitted? Have they been painted over? That's quite a common one. If they were not originally present, this may be acceptable, subject to the findings of your fire risk assessment. And I will keep trying to bring us back to, what does the fire risk assessment say about this? A door assessment is a spot check, and you're assessing it against guidance, which is the guidance that we're looking at is in terms of installation guidance. That fire door is not being installed. So we can gather all that evidence, and then there must be an assessment of the risk. Pass it back to the fire risk assessment. Are the gaps excessive? The industry standard is that gap size should be never more than 4 mil, except at the bottom of a fire door, where the gap should be as small as practicable, whilst ensuring the door is unlikely to snag on the floor, even if the door drops slightly on the hinges. So as we all know, heat and smoke rises. So the area we're most concerned about is the top of the door. Smoke can get underneath, but how large is the block of flats? Where is that door in question? How long do we think that the means of escape will be tenable? So I went off on a bit of a tangent. I was starting to wonder, well, actually, what are the tolerances required throughout the rest of the world? So you can see from the actual threshold gap, which is the bottom of the door, there's a big difference in terms of what countries actually require. And these are the same fire doors. A hell of a lot of fire doors are made in Taiwan. And so they're shipped all over the world, and they're installed by installation companies. So manufacturers, installers will take them. However, they are blanks made in typically countries like Taiwan. So they go all over the world, and they're all required to do the same thing. America, the threshold gap can be no more than 19 mil. Australia is 10 mil, Hong Kong 10 mil, New Zealand is 10 to 25 mil, Dubai or United Arab Emirates is 13 mil. So it's the same humans, same buildings, and yet the tolerances are really different. So what we're actually should be mostly focused on is that 3 mil. That seems to be a common reoccurring theme, that 3 mil gap around the edges and around the top of the door is really what we're seeking to do. Hinges, are they in good working order? There's no obvious defects in the hinges. There should be 3 and CE marked. Failure to have 3 hinges what does the risk assessment say against that? But if you were doing an installation, yes, must have 3 hinges, should be CE marked. If that door in situ does not have 3 hinges, it doesn't mean you're breaking the law. It's against a code of practice, guidance, British standard, but it doesn't mean to say you can go to jail, you would be prosecuted because you don't have 3 hinges on the door. Is that door maintaining an effective means of escape? Again, assess the risk that's in front of you. Is the glazing broken or showing signs of any damage? So Georgian wire glass is quite easy to point out that it is fire resistant just by the lines on it. That's a good indication that the door is required or has been manufactured to be fire resistant. If you look in clear glazing, quite often you'll see this sign, which is on the bottom left, which will give you a number. That's quite easily Googleable, so it will tell you what level of fire resistance that's required to be. Sometimes you will see that it's security glass, which again has a limited level of fire resistance, but it does have a level of fire resistance to it. Are letterboxes firmly shut and not showing signs of any damage? And test evidence. So there's lots of different types of test evidence that you could get. So a nice one is there will be a label, which is typically at the top of the door. A good check for that is that get your phone, basically put it on portrait mode and hold it up in front of the door so you can see what's up there and take a picture of it. That will tell you precisely what that fire door rating is, the number, who manufactured it. That gives anyone that's assessing that door the right amount of information. But it relates back to a fire door from that manufacturer has been tested and found to meet 30 minutes. It's important to remember that a door at some point has been tested and will meet 30 minutes, and it comes from that manufacturer. So it's good for us. It provides us comfort, but it's not the be all and end all. Sometimes what you'll also find is trider plugs. So they are little coloured plugs with arrows, or a lot of people call them Christmas trees, that gives us information on the relevant fire resistance of the fire door. What happens when you... Sorry, Adam, do you want to say?
There's a couple of questions. One about flat doors, going back to flat doors, but that a door is no longer compliant because the manufacturers have withdrawn it. I assume it's one of these composite doors. What would somebody do then, especially if the passive fire company that installed it is no longer accepting liability to remediate it? Do those doors still need to be replaced if they've got these the composite doors?
No, very unlikely. So what we would class that as a notional door, or some people call them nominal or notional doors.
No, a door, one of the composite flat entrance doors that were tested, but the certification's been withdrawn.
So if the certification has been withdrawn, it was produced at some point when those doors were installed. So that batch of fire doors came with evidence to say that door would meet 30 minutes. So I think it's discuss it with your risk assessor. You know, what do they believe? Again, it's down to the circumstance of the case. There's probably a good argument to say, well, actually, we're now uncomfortable with those doors and the door should be remediated, should be replaced. Doesn't mean to say that every door should be replaced immediately. You can do a program which says we're going to update each door every, we're going to change doors, 5 a month until the end of the year. But I think it really comes down to the circumstance of the case. How is the block constructed? What's the height of it? Is it timber frame construction? Lots of things can go into that. So I think it really depends on the circumstance of the case.
I think the MHCLG produced some guidance specifically on that GRP issue. So it's probably worth seeing whether that's been updated. And what about talking about looking at threshold gaps? BS 8214 says 3 mil on a threshold gap for smoke control doors. Is it worth trying to explain to people the difference between just a fire door and a smoke control door, and what why that 3 mil versus the 10 mil becomes important?
Yeah, so if we take it back to the actual design of the building and the smoke control, so what we're looking for if there's a fire, what's happening with the smoke inside those buildings. So you'd have equipment like AOVs, automatic opening vents, which will lead the smoke through the building and out of the building. So there are doors that also play a role in that, which is important to note that the door assessor, the fire risk assessor, should be well aware of what that door's requirement is. So if there are any issues with that door, again, it heightens the the need for remedial action. It places more importance on that door if it's part of a smoke control system. It's important that it's actually going to do its job when it's required to do. But you may find that a fire door assessor, they're looking at the fire door and seeing all the precautions and applying the point of guidance, but actually, are they aware of what that fire door is there to do? What's its role? I think it's important that if there was a case a while ago where a certain company was prosecuted for all-around compartmentation around fire doors, but 2 of those doors that were cited weren't actually required to be fire doors. So effectively, when you're looking at gaps, things like that, it doesn't matter. You can have a big whacking great hole in it, but sometimes when there's construction, they just put fire doors in as many places as possible. So it's important to go back and go, actually, what is required to be a fire door? Particularly if you're dealing with older buildings. What's the strategy of that building? What is it designed to do? What are the required means of escape? And how are those doors, different types of doors, affording that effective means of escape? Notional doors or nominal doors. So this is generally an older type of door, which could have been in place for many years and met earlier standards for manufacture and test, but it doesn't display any fire test evidence. It's been there for such a long time. If we would start asking the questions of, okay, where did you get it from? Who installed it? What evidence is that it's fire resistant? There's nothing. So at that point, we need to analyze what's in front of us. So what's the thickness of that door? That's a good indication of that it's some form of fire resistant. If it has glazing in it, if it has the Georgian wire glass, that's a good indication that it is some level of fire resistance. Give it a good tap. Does it sound fairly thick? Again, if it's a very old door, like the one I mentioned earlier, it's solid oak, can a risk assessed approach actually allow that door in situ? I think I'm always conscious that these are people's homes and we're not trying to make them look like a fire safety shop. So if you do have properties which are perhaps older and a bit more ornate, do we have to lose every part of character of that building due to fire safety? Or can actually we look at it? Is there any remedial action which could upgrade it? So putting on intermittent strips and cold smoke seals is a way of perhaps mitigating that risk. It doesn't mean to say that it just needs to be removed. Just because they don't display the modern equivalents does not mean that they are fit for purpose. And this text here is not my words, that comes directly from British guidance, British government guidance. So it's important to note that this isn't me just going off on a tangent. This is what's being told to us.
There's a couple of questions that people have asked, especially around notional doors, both in conversions or buildings that don't necessarily fall under the requirements of the Fire Safety England regs to have these door checks done. So if you have a building under 11 meters, do we need to keep doing these door checks? And if we come across notional doors, do we need to fit those strips and seals? And if a door surveyor has recommended strips and seals, should that work be done versus the recommendations of a risk assessor? So I haven't made that very clear. If you've got a door surveyor that said fit strips and seals to a notional door, should we be doing that? And if we've got a risk assessor, what's the difference between a door surveyor recommending it and a risk assessor recommending it?
I guess it comes down to the competence of the individual. So there are risk assessors that will do door surveys. There are fire engineers that will do door surveys. So the the person must be competent in making that rule. So the law says competence is suitable training, knowledge, experience, and/or other qualities. So if you have a recommendation from whoever, ask them the question why. Push back. If you're spending money, just because you're faced with a report that says failure, this must be done. If it's a new report that's been carried out, why hadn't your previous risk assessment picked any of this up? So you have at that point two conflicting reports, two conflicting bits of advice from seemingly two competent people. So I think it's important that take that information, push back, ask the question why. If you get answers such as, well, to meet the standard, we're not trying to meet the standard. The standard that they're referring to is the installation standard. So you're not installing any doors, you're looking at doors in situ. Take that information and perhaps give it to your fire risk assessor. I like to think that to drive competence in the industry, everyone should feel that they're quite happy to be questioned on their decisions. So I think, push back, ask the questions. Actually, what is it relating to? Why do they think, because the doors don't have intermittent strips, that it is not maintaining effective means of escape? And put the report to your risk assessor. I think ask the right questions. I think it's good that people should have to back up what their findings are.
It seems to me the red flag really is when you have a door survey and you have a whole load of notional communal fire doors, and a surveyor comes along and just says fit strips and seals to every single one of these doors without justification, versus maybe specific doors that might need that work doing because there's a particular risk.
Yeah, I think intermittent strips, cold smoke seals are a relatively low cost improvement to fire safety. So it's fairly easy to sort of, for people to go, okay, we'll do it, because it's not loads of money. We're not asking for sprinkler installation. It on the face of it should improve safety, so we'll do it. I think if you look at intermittent strips, the way that they work is in a fire test, they're installed on doors, and you've got that furnace heat hitting it, and you've got constant heat, which is licking the door, which expands the material, and it goes and it fills the gap around a fire door. Real life fires don't actually work like that, and intermittent strips will only work if they're all activated. So if you have a fire and perhaps the window's open, you can get a problem with constant heat and smoke hitting that door. There are plenty of real life fires where the evidence suggests that the intermittent strips haven't actually activated as they should. So we shouldn't be lulled into thinking just because you've done that, they are perfect. It's not driving the risk down, to a really low level just because you've done that. I think it's a good bargaining tool that if there is real doubt against the doors, but yet you want to keep those doors in, or perhaps your budget is quite low, it's a good argument to say, well, actually put intermittent strips on. But to do it properly, you need to take the doors off, route out the edges, put them back on, or install the intermittent strips and then re-hang the door. Who's checking after the joiner's been in and done that? That's the other thing to remember. Make sure someone's coming back in and going, fine, it's been done correctly. But we shouldn't be lulled into thinking just because intermittent strips on the door that they are solving all of our problems, that there we go, we now have an effective means of escape. Doesn't necessarily mean that in all circumstances. So new door sets compliant with building regulations. So guidance and approved document B advised that flat entrance door sets should achieve 30+ minutes fire resistance. Older timber doors manufacturer installed before current fire resistant test standards may not have achieved this performance if tested to current test standards. These doors should still be acceptable if they're in good condition without excessive gaps between the leaf and the frame. And again, these are not my words. So, if you guys want to keep this, we can get a PDF copy sent out to people, but this is effectively distilling it. And I think this is part of the problem, that the the market is seizing an opportunity to yes, to improve fire safety within blocks of flats, but also how much work is being carried out almost needlessly, or how much work is being carried out just because, and you have that fear of fire, so there's an opportunity to make money from it. I quite wanted to really be, to stand on a bit of a soapbox and say, can we just actually look at what is the overall objective of this? The overall objective is that we have a higher frequency. So if there is damage to fire doors, it's picked up quicker. It doesn't mean to say that all of these fire doors required remedial action. That's not what is in the guidance. That's not what is meant by these checks. It means that if there is significant damage, it's going to be picked up quicker, or if the door closes disengaged. It doesn't mean to say that let's all go off and remediate every flat entrance door there is. That's not what's required. That's not what the government is asking you to do. So what are you getting at the end of your fire door assessment? These are two bona fide reports. So I'm often sent reports and going, what do you think of this? What's it actually telling you? Is it passing or is it failing? Passing or failing what? The law isn't a pass or a fail. I think with assessments like this, it's very hard to determine. There is no appraisal. There's no assessment of the risk. It's a very binary approach, which is fine if you're using that to collate information. So here's all the information we've got. Okay, then where's your assessment of the risk? So it would fail an installation standard if we're installing the door today. Well, that's okay. Or every notional door would fail. But what are you actually telling me? Where is this guidance? It shouldn't be that, here we go, it's failed. Language like that is very emotive, and it's not telling the responsible person anything. It's actually driving them into going, oh, Christ, I've got to do something about that. Where is the commentary? Where's the assessment of that risk? And I think it's really important to push back and ask, people are paying an awful lot of money for door inspections, so there should be an assessment of that risk. This data behind it should almost just be for them. And actually that should come down to, we've checked all of these doors. These doors were in a category that we're okay with them. That data is there, it's safe. However, these doors, we find there's issues because of these reasons. We don't think it's maintaining an effective means of escape because of this. So at this point, these are bona fide headlines. So 3/4 of fire door inspections fail. If 3/4 of fire doors are failing inspections, doesn't that mean that we're very likely we're applying the wrong level of standards? If the MOT checks all of a sudden changed, 3/4 of our fire doors, I think we'd then, or cars, I think we'd then look at it and go, well, perhaps we're applying wrong methodology. What we're looking at here is we're applying a standard of fire door installation. If 3/4 of those doors that we're looking at are failing, however, fire risk assessments would have been carried out several times before this, before the sort of the need for enhanced fire door inspections. And a fire risk assessor has not flagged up any of this work. So what's happening at this point? And that's where I think that a lot of the industry, a lot of the noise coming out of it is trying to cause, or is causing, panic and frustration and, oh my God, all this needs to happen. I think when you've got statistics that 3/4 of all fire doors are failing, I don't think that assessment is happening. That's way too high a statistic for my liking anyway. So a fire door inspector may gather the data on the door irrespective, would it meet an installation standard, BS 8214. The fire safety order is not prescriptive and uses phrases like suitable and sufficient, reasonable adjustments. British standards are not law. So when we talk about failing or non-compliance, the British standards are a code of practice which enables people to have guidelines. So you've got to use something. You've got to have a benchmark somewhere. But if your doors don't meet those guidelines, the risk needs to be removed, resolved, or reduced. This is the risk assessment process. So an extract directly from every British standard. This British standard takes the form of guidance and recommendations. It should not be quoted as if it was specification, and particular care should be taken to ensure that claims of compliance are not misleading. You are not breaking the law because you failed to meet a British standard. A British standard is like I said, it's a point of guidance, a point of reference. And if your door assessor is blindly applying that like it's the law, they're wrong. They can use it to inform their decisions, inform their guidance to you. But it is not a pass or fail based on an installation standard, unless they are brand new installed doors. And at that point, you would use that standard to the nth degree. So whilst door surveyors will survey a door to installation standards, the British standard doesn't have much say on the re-inspection other than to check for damage and excessive bowing or deformation. So that's effectively, that's where it comes down to. That's what the British standard says in terms of, well, when you go and look at it, check what's happening. So is there any structural damage? Is there excessive bowing or deformation? Really a door should be put in and it should last a decent period of time. I think it's around 15 years. I did ask some door manufacturers a while ago. It all depends on what the type of door closer has been put in, whether they have fire door retainers, the heat of the building, and all these types of things. But doors are living, breathing things, so they can warp, they can bow. So those are the things that we're concerned about. So what then should happen? So gather the information relating to the testing and the state of the door, provide an assessment of the risk. So get your data gathering. I'm not saying that all that data is not important and we should just go off on a tangent and do a big holistic appraisal. That's not what I'm saying. Gather that information and then make an assessment of the risk that's in front of you. Consult with your fire risk assessment if it's not the same competent person. Decide between all of you what is suitable in the circumstances of the case. If remedial action is required, use third-party accredited companies, but also address the root cause of the issue. Like when I said, going back earlier about self-closers, there's no point just going, well, we've put the arm back on, there we go, the problem's gone away. The problem is the door's too heavy for the occupant and they're going to end up doing that again. Or perhaps in that block, people are sick and tired of those doors slamming. Well, can the door closer be adjusted? That's the problem. And then record all the actions and data gathered. On the left-hand side, there is an excerpt from RiskBase. So it's a tool for door assessors and risk assessors and for responsible people. So it's gathering all that information. So it takes it to a live in situ, here's where the pin is, here's where that door actually is situated. Here's all the information that's been gathered about that door that we know of. So when you do re-inspection, is that all still applicable? Does that all still provide the job that I need it to do? Adam, do you want to talk a little bit more about?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk a little bit about RiskBase. I think there's a couple of other questions, and I think Dean has come up with a really good point. I think is worth a bit of clarification. And he said new door sets should be installed to manufacturer's instructions. 8214 is a generic document and isn't the standard for installing new door sets. I think this is probably worth clarifying that a door, you much better that you do this, but how a door is certified and what that certification means versus the 8214 standard.
Yeah, it's a good point. So the manufacturer will provide guidance in terms of how this should be installed, what components it should be installed along with. So there should be a declaration of performance. So when you're installing new doors or when you're constructing a building and they're all going in, there should be a clear methodology that it should be installed on, and only if it's installed in those ways will it then come with certification for the door. So yeah, it's a good point.
So how would somebody retrospectively apply the British standard to a door if they don't have that installation or that the installation guidance from the door manufacturer?
At that point, if we have no installation guidance, you're using the skill of the assessor. So number one, is the door, does it look like it's been manufactured to be some form of fire resistance? It's going to be very difficult to tell if you have no evidence whatsoever to go back on. So who manufactured it at what time? What's it designed to do? what components should be on that door. It's very difficult, but at that point, it's using the skill of the assessor to say, well, actually, I'm okay with it for these reasons, or I don't think that's suitable, in which case I'd ask for removal.
Cool. I think
it can get quite tricky at that point.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time there is, if the door is certified and tested, it's on the door, and there are plugs on the door as well as the labels. And I think from a technical perspective, we've covered pretty much everything. You've got one more slide, haven't you?
Yeah, final thoughts. So I'll give final thoughts. So changes in legislation will not only bring about improvement in fire safety, but it also brings huge economic growth in the fire door sector. And I'm making this point as a bona fide, effectively, I can assess fire doors. So there is a benefit to me having this change in legislation, but it shouldn't, I want to try and make people aware that to avoid sort of ambulance chasers, and how is your assessor, are they independent in their thoughts, or are they affiliated to another company that will very much like the remedial action? I think always beware of them. If you get a company that comes in that also tests, maintains, installs, provides equipment for fire doors, and they're coming in to check for faults that they would like to make money on putting right. Now that's casting a fairly big brush, and I will say not every company is like that, but I would just have a bit of thought about the people that are coming in to do those and what's in it for them if they do find remedial action. If they do have a company they work with, a partner company that can put these things right, that's not to say it's a bad thing. Because like I said, an assessment of the door, you should be able to back it up with your appraisal, your risk of that door. Why do you think this should happen? I think currently too much money is being wasted on remedial action without proper assessment of the risk. Lots of these spreadsheets that are saying fail. So, okay, it's failed. What do I need to do? Install this. That's far too binary. And I think that it's difficult to argue, because I think in some instances you can say, well, why are you arguing against putting intermittent strips on door? They will improve risk. Well, yes, they are. But if a block has a certain budget for fire safety, perhaps, a better way to spend that money is in different areas. Without touching the doors. And I think that's the important thing to get across. I think if you're paying for a service, make sure you're getting the right advice and it's clearly explained to you so you understand it.
This is the big question, is getting people to ask those questions. We're under a bit of pressure. If you could just skip to that next slide. Everybody's here to hear about doors and not a sales pitch for RiskBase. I get that. But I just want to spend 2 minutes covering, just make sure you put in a system that stores information about the doors. You're spending a lot of money on a door survey. If you're paying 15, 20, 30 quid for each communal door that you're surveying, what you don't want to happen is that information to get stuck in a PDF on a shared drive. You need to have that in a database so that you have that ideally that door that says, look, this is a BM Trada certified door installed by this person or this organization. And it's had a door survey. I've had a proportion of the architraves off. I know that this is installed to a standard. And then you've gone and done your quarterly inspections, your quarterly fire safety England checks. And when those things raise remedial work, that's in an audit trail. And if you keep putting that in different spreadsheets and in different PDFs, and then copying and pasting that into whatever your property management system is, you're just not going to effectively comply with the Building Safety Act, which is a much bigger bit of legislation to get prosecuted under than the Fire Safety England regulations, which is much simpler. So try not to, I know that there's a lot of regulation out there, try not to deal with it piecemeal. Really look at implementing management systems that make your life easier. And that's not just about making your life easier. If you have a management system, it'll be much cheaper and much easier to comply. Section 156, Building Safety Act as well, which is amending the fire safety order, is requiring you to share fire precautions about a building and key risks with residents. That's not leaseholders, that's residents, that's tenants, that's anybody over the age of 16 or 16 or over. If you've got those systems in place, great. If you would like some help, obviously we'd love to help you do that. There was a little video that just played a second ago. One of the very basic things we do is an app which helps you with your door inspections, but it can do every other kind of inspection as well. QR coding, floor plans, producing SIB documentation is something we've been doing for 15 odd years, not just with block managers, but with commercial organizations and housing associations all over the UK. If we spend the last minute or two dealing with these questions, Tom, if you look at the Q&A panel, I've just left open, if you stop your screen sharing, I've just left open a few of the key questions, which I think people have asked a few times. Be helpful if you covered that rather than me trying to paraphrase it.
Yeah. So Sylvia's got a good question about letterboxes. So ours were installed in the 70s. We have resisted having them all changed because we understand these would be making adaptations to the doors, which would originally have been compliant to fire doors in the 70s. It's a difficult one because you are talking sort of 40 odd years ago those were installed. You would have to make a pretty strong argument that you're still comfortable that those letterboxes are appropriate in the circumstances. I think there's probably ways, because if the idea that we're keeping letterboxes is for aesthetics, I think there's probably companies that can provide remedial action. So perhaps the intermittents could be changed, but the actual face of the letterboxes could remain the same. If it's about cost, it really does depend on, again, the circumstances of the case. So how old is that block? How tall is it? How is it constructed? What are the age? So that the mobility of the residents is all things that would play into a decision on that. I think that it's difficult. It's difficult to say. I appreciate some questions will come up that are, what about mine? It's really difficult without knowing the true circumstance of the case, but there are ways how that could be approached.
Well, I think her point is that she doesn't like them, but they don't want to change them because that would change the door, and therefore the door would no longer be compliant. And I think your point is, it's fine, you can change them, but just make sure you install a resisting door.
Yeah, absolutely. So Anonymous, if the flat doors are very old and do not have any signs to identify them as fire doors, should we assume they're not fire rated? So no, not at all. If they are on your flat entrance door, there's a very good sign that it's probably going to have some level of fire resistance. Measure the depth of the door. It's around 44 mil. There's a good chance that that's an indication that it's fire resistant. Have a look at the top. So get your phone, put it on sort of selfie mode, have a look around the top of the door. Can you see the sort of veneer on one side and then intermittent glue in the middle? Hear it, feel it, the sound of an actual fire door. There's a really good chance that it is a notional door if it has any glazing to it. There's lots of different approaches that you can look at to go, do we think that's fire resistant? There's a good chance in a purpose-built block of flats that it has been at some point that it was manufactured to be a fire door. And there's various tests you can do to go, well, was it a 30-minute or a 60-minute door? But absolutely. Just because it doesn't have a plug or a label on it does not mean that it's not fire resistant. Those labels can come off. Do you have a recommended list of assessors and contractors? I think that I would always be a big advocate for using third-party assessors, third-party accredited companies. I think that it's important that if a company has accreditation, ask who's actually doing your assessment. Make sure that the people that are doing it are competent, and there should be a process in that. So if we carry out a fire door assessment, that assessment should be reviewed and validated by another competent person. So you're not just getting one person say so, you're getting the view of a particular company. I think Adam, or I think RiskBase has also got a list of various companies that are competent in doing so.
Yeah, we obviously work with lots of different surveyors, and I think it's really tough because there are plenty of good door surveyors out there that haven't necessarily signed up to BM Trada or FDIS or one of the schemes. So it's not necessarily the competence of the organization, it's the competence of the surveyor that's doing it. As with everything in fire, there's not a particularly nice tick box way to go, oh, here's a list of great bits of certification. I would turn around, find a door company that you like that are providing good quality remedial recommendations to you, not just blanket stuff where they're firing out tick boxes. Are you able to have a two-way conversation with them, and then get your fire risk assessor to validate that as well? Because I think if your fire risk assessor is happy with it and you're confident in the company that's surveying it, great. But it's not the right scheme, unfortunately.
I think that's a really good point. I think that going back to the competence of the person. So if you have, third-party certification, it's a quite straightforward way to show competence. So you have suitable training, knowledge, experience, and you're keeping up with your CPD. Doesn't mean to say that just because someone doesn't have that, they can't be competent. A fire engineer, most of them will be able to assess fire doors, but they're not going to have really anything relevant in terms of standout fire door diploma. But they can prove their competence in a number of different ways. I think check professional indemnity insurance, make sure the people that are actually advising you against this are insured to do so. But I think, ask the question of people, what tools are they using? So if you use RiskBase, every door will be QR code and it's live in there. So if you want to change out a contractor in a year's time, in a month's time, your data is in a system which is not locked behind a firewall of another company. So you're indebted to that company to get your data. It's your data. It's not the assessor's company. It's important that you should have that flexibility. I think in terms of the quarterly inspections and things like that, what data have you already got? So how good is that information? So if you're just starting out in that process, I'd suggest that making sure that you get professionals in, so the assessment of all of the certification and the door in situ is fine. I think the quarterly checks, well, can you up the competence of your internal teams to do that? Perhaps you can save some money. Perhaps they've got they're given more chance of getting into flat entrance doors because of the frequency of their going in already. So use what resources you already have, because at that point the data should be good. So you've got all of the information in regards to the certification, you've got the door in situ. The ongoing checks are checking for, is it still okay? Is there a big whacking great hole in it? And you should be able to see in a system like RiskBase, you should be able to see pictures from previous inspections to go, hang on, that looks a bit different. I should be able to see back and what happened in 6 months ago. When was that last checked? And it should identify, hang on, you're doing your flat entrance door checks, that's great, but you keep missing flats 13 to 36. They're areas you need to focus on. But I think, you'll all on this call be quite used to appointing people, and I think it's getting that feeling from them and asking the right questions. Can I see some examples of your door surveys? And if they send you big spreadsheets, try and remember this in my annoying whinging voice going, where is your assessment of the risk? Because all that is data. There's no analysis of that data in a spreadsheet. So what tools are they using to enable you to do your job? And have they engaged with the risk assessor? There's lots of questions you should be asking for the right to the right provider.
And you're paying a lot of money for these surveys, so that spreadsheet isn't good enough. It's just a tick box. It's an audit. It's not a proper survey.
Yeah.
We've run quite far over. I think I've covered everything.
Yes, I think so. There's a lot of questions there, and you've covered them all throughout, so that was brilliant. Managed to get through every single one.
So
All right, thank you both for your time today, Tom and Adam. Thank you
if
for
anybody
everyone.
does have a technical question or something that they're stuck on, email me or Tom. My email address is in that answered questions section, and we'll gladly try and help out.
Yeah, I can provide your details as well when I follow up with the slides and the recording. So if anyone's got any questions they want to reach out to you directly, then they can do so.
Great.
All right, thank you both.
Thank you very
We
much.
have another webinar tomorrow if anyone wants to join us on a guide to lease extensions. So if anyone's interested in joining us for that, then you can register on the News on the Block website. Otherwise, I will be in touch with the slides and the recording this afternoon. And thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Have a good
Vicky.
day. Bye.